Welcome to the Physician Associate Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Physician Associate Podcast. My name is James and today I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin Monk, who is the Chief Culture Officer at a company called SARD JV. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Hello.
Or rather, I should say welcome back, because it's your second appearance on the Physician Associate Podcast.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah, you were in the hot seat last time.
We made an episode of your podcast, Sardisms, together, which I've shared out on the PA podcast feed as well. Do you want to just start by explaining a little bit about what SARD is?
It's a NHS workforce company. It's a company that I never intended to start. I'm a software engineer by training, did a computer science degree. I built something for Oxley's, which is a mental health trust. It's sort of Dartford area, just really as a project for them around learning and development and reporting on training. And it just sort of snowballed. It was a really successful project. There used to be an organization called the NHS Litigation Authority. They came in, did some audits, and were like, wow, where's this bit of software here? Where did you get it from? And they went, that guy over there in the shed built it. It's just sort of snowballed from there. And we kept building things with Oxley's. There's a great kind of culture there of giving people autonomy. They're good. They were often at the top of the staff satisfaction survey for trusts. They used to give their staff loads of autonomy. And consequently, their learning and development manager is my co-founder, Phil, got me in and got me building all of these projects with them. And eventually we got to a project which was medical revalidation, and they were a pilot site for revalidation of medics back in 2011. And so we built a bit of software there to track their portfolio, the good medical practice portfolio, and do their appraisals. And one day, Dr. Kocher phoned me up and he said, I'm going to a meeting with all of the other responsible officers in London, all the medical directors effectively in London. Could you come up and show them what we've built? And I thought it was a sort of NHS show and tell. So I went and demoed it, and I thought, and they just want to see what we're building so they can learn from it. And at the end of the presentation, they were like, wow, it's really good. How much is it? And I went, oh, I didn't mean to sell it to you. I wasn't selling it. I was just showing you what we'd built at Oxley's. And then I came out of that meeting with my commercial greenness. And Dr. Kocher is not commercially green. He's a very good businessman. And he said to me, look, you have built us something really valuable here. It's really great. Why don't we form a joint venture between us and you and see where we can take this? And we did take it, and it went really far. We built systems for appraisal, revalidation, job planning, multi-source feedback, e-rostering, capacity and demand, basically anything involving workforce in the NHS is where we sit. And it's in Guy's and St Thomas's and King's and Oxford University Hospitals and Nottingham and Leeds and Manchester and Southampton, and pretty much every big teaching hospital in the country is using it. So really proud of where it's gone. Yeah, and that's where we're at. And we're 10 years old and still going strong.
With that in mind, is there a particular project that you've worked on that is PA focused or has included PAs?
Well, I feel like I set you up for this one because our latest product, and it's the team job planning. Now, when I say job planning, most medics, I think, will probably be hanging up. Don't hang up. Don't hang up your podcast. Keep it going. And maybe other groups might do so too. Job planning is becoming, a bigger thing, I think, in the NHS. In short, it should be saying roughly what you're doing as a job. I've got a contract. Everyone who works for me has a contract. Here's the days you work. Here's roughly what you should be working on. Here's your job description. Here's the activities you should be doing. Now, medics have been doing that for a long time. Consultants have had to say how many, now this is awkward, PAs, but in this day it's programmed activities, but you guys are also called PAs. So
yes, gets a little bit confusing, doesn't it?
Just call it hours. Let's call it hours. I will stop using the word PAs in the sense of programmed activities, hours. So they should have a job plan that has the number of hours that they do and what activities they're doing, how much direct clinical care they're doing, how much supporting professional activities doing, how many MDT meetings, just roughly, so that you have a model of the capacity in your service. So if you're a trust or an organization, you can say, well, I've got this number of rheumatologists and they're doing X amount of hours in this clinic, in this setting. Now that's becoming a thing for other professional groups now, and we're building up AHP job plans. We're building up job plans for clinical nurse specialists, physician associates, and the purpose of that is that when you do that in a team job planning capacity, when you're looking at multidisciplinary teams and building all of those capacity plans together, what you can do is you can look at your demand model. And you can say, okay, how many referrals, how many follow-ups have we got for this clinic, and who's dealing with them, and how much resource do we have to deal to hit the backlog and hit the new patients coming into the system. And so you create a demand model, you create a capacity model, and then you do a comparison between them. And what pops out of that is your job plans. In an ideal world, I would have these people here, this is what I've got, and this is the gap I've got. And then once you've done that, once you've got your demand model, once you've got your capacity model, what you can do then is actually look at the mix of professional groups involved in that patient's care and start to do service design. And that's where I think physician associates particularly really come into the mix here, because what we did at Barking, Havering and Redbridge, we did this for rheumatology department, elderly medicine, I can't remember the other one. We've done it for a number of departments at Barking and Havering hospitals. We piloted the team job planning system, and now we're rolling out it at Oxley's as well, and in a mental health setting. But one of the things we saw was that in the follow-up appointments, there was quite a lot of consultants working on those follow-up appointments, and actually, because of the activity type and because of the clinic, some of that work could go to clinical nurse specialists. And so what you're doing is we saw a gap of essentially 2 full-time equivalents within that department that could be closed simply by using different professional groups for that activity. And I think this makes an argument for where you do have those multidisciplinary teams, where you have more of a different mix of physician associates, when you've got clinical nurse specialists, prescribing nurses, when you've got all of those mix, looking at the capacity model, looking at demand model and saying, hey, if we change the service design here, if we had more people doing this on this particular activity, who do we need to recruit to? Where are the gaps? Where is the backlog? And the concept of having more physician associates or more clinical nurse specialists starts to come into the fray. You're discussing it as an overall load on that system. Does that make sense?
More in terms of what work needs to be done and who can do it, rather than this work has always been done by a consultant. So it has to be a consultant all the time. It changes that mindset, doesn't it?
Or even just asking the question, could this be done by a different professional group? Who should we recruit next? And where are we? You may even look at the data and go, we're really meeting the demand on this service here. And why are we meeting demand? Oh, look at all these physician associates that are helping get these people through. So, it becomes a model for other teams as well. So we're really excited about it. I know that, whenever you mention workforce, it's like, well, we know it's terrible. It's like, part of me is like, are we selling fire alarm systems in a building that's on fire? Are we helping people detect that they simply don't have enough workforce? But when I think of it as another kind of analogy, budgeting, when budgeting meant the most to me is when I had the least amount of money. That's when budgeting was something that my wife and I sat down and went, we want to do all these things. We've got very limited cash. What can we do? What can't we do? What are the tough choices? How much do we need to push on this in order to, how much more money do we need to get in to meet our ambitions here? And I don't know whether you've ever done that sort of budgeting, but you stress about it and you feel worried about it. And then actually once you get it down on paper and once you look at your capacity and demand or your cash and your outgoings, it's it's kind of a relief. You've got a plan. Action's a great antidote to anxiety. And so once you've got that plan down, you feel a lot better about what's possible, and you can start to see a path ahead. And I think for people working in those places where perhaps they are understaffed and they don't have the capacity, actually even being heard, even being able to point to a document and say, look, this is the amount of patients we're seeing, and this is the amount of staff we've got. And I can cry about it, and I can scream into a box, as one of my junior doctor friends was told to do, or I could point to the team job plan and say, what do you want to do about this? There's a problem here. And actually have the evidence to back it up.
And I think that is probably something that physician associates may not necessarily expect to be doing as clinicians, but are probably uniquely placed to be doing within their teams, because the doctors rotate through their training programs and move departments every few months, move hospitals every year, move deaneries, those kind of things. So they're never there long enough, particularly, I guess, to get stuck into the workforce issues and service redesign. Whereas actually that is an element of what physician associates could be doing in terms of service improvement, redesigning the model of care, and taking a look at those job plans. We are, by our nature as physician associates, I suppose, disrupting the normal models of medical care, and perhaps could use technology such as what you guys have developed to further that cause.
Definitely so. I mean, I think this is one of the things we discussed on last time we did the podcast, was that one of the benefits of physician associates is they do stay still a bit more, so they get to know the terrain and they get to know what's working. And in that role, you've probably got more ability to help shape service design and look at those plans and look at workforce planning.
Brilliant. So it was that kind of fusion between you being the software development and engineering side of things, meeting a demand for clinicians who need to use software tools.
Yeah, I think so. It was born, it was that perfect sweet spot of a part of an NHS trust that had the autonomy to go and build things for themselves, to build the things they needed. A small enough engineering team that you could go and talk to them directly. It's not sort of outsourced. It's not a million change control request forms going through. You could talk directly to the client. And so, yeah, it was a product developed from the ground up. And I think that makes all the difference. And that's often what you see in successful systems in the health service, is that they've often been built by somebody in there, and then someone's grabbed hold of them and commercialized them and turned it into something good. Unfortunately, I think often then it starts to lose that, because that product then often gets sold on, and it becomes part of a bigger beast, and that sort of connection towards the end user tends to go. And that's one of the reasons that we set up Public Money, Public Code, myself and Professor Joe McDonald. And if you're interested in that, we've got a podcast on it, on SARDisms. But the idea was, look, we want more of that. We want more of systems where the clinicians and the end users and the nurses and the AHPs, but also, administrative staff, are sort of directly connected to the people building it, and it's small enough that it can be built up from the ground upwards. And how do we sustain companies that operate that way without them being basically consumed by bigger fish and pulled in and become part of a kind of vendor lock-in ecosystem? And the idea was that Public Money, Public Code, the idea was that you would take, public money and turn it into open source code. Not because open source is kind of hippie and lovely and vegan and, knit your own yogurt community, but because actually when you have open source code, what it does is it allows SMEs, it allows small and medium-sized businesses to get in on that software that's been built underneath it and start improvising and, doing their own innovative ideas on the side of that ecosystem. And so if you've got that thing in the middle, you're pushing back against vendor lock-in. You're giving people the routes back to their own data, back to, their own rostering data. So you put all of this rostering data into a system, you shouldn't have to pay to get that information back out. It's your data. Same, I know that those who work on clinical systems often feel quite passionately about this. For the patient, it's the patient's data. It shouldn't be hard to extract it back out. It shouldn't be you have to connect to this connector API and it's going to cost you X amount per year. It belongs to the patient. You're not there to build a business around locking people out of their own data. And so that's the concept behind it. And that's the ethos behind our company, is how can we make sure that we keep that winning concept alive, that sweet spot alive of really good engineering directly connected to the people who need to use it.
When I was a physician associate student, I was just focused on what my job might be clinically. And I had no idea really that I would eventually go into working as a PA ambassador for my area and promoting the profession and then doing some workforce planning projects that way. And I think it's becoming clearer to me, definitely, that there's a bit of an innovation streak as well in terms of how I can use digital technology to do some of that project. And just from what you've told me in the first few minutes of this episode, it's making me think about the other episodes I've done on my podcast with the NHS Clinical Entrepreneurs Scheme. And the other episode that we made together is with SARDisms. And what I'm really excited about is the fact that SARD have built this amazing online portfolio for physician associates. And you were kind enough to let me have a demonstration access to the website so I could see what it was all about for myself. And I think it's really brilliant. It's exactly the kind of thing that the profession is going to need as an ePortfolio. There's the opportunity for job planning, for appraisals, for portfolio review, multi-source feedback, questionnaires, all those sorts of things that we've been doing on pen and paper, I guess, as a profession by and large. And it's really exciting that you've built this digital version to help the profession move forwards and to be more efficient. For the average PA who's a clinician but not got any sort of software background or engineering background, where would they go to learn a bit about coding or learn a bit about software engineering? Who should they be talking to and what should they be focusing on?
Well, there is a group that's clinicians that code. There's quite a big community on Twitter of clinicians that are interested in tech, and if they connect with me on Twitter, I can certainly signpost them to other people who are involved in the kind of tech side, the health tech side, and we could point them from there. But I think some of it is just go out and learn about this stuff and just enjoy it. You don't always know where the serendipity lies in these things. That term, like learn to code, right? It's become such a horrible phrase, and I know there's like a bad connotation with it, but there's a real joy that comes with coding, and it doesn't mean that you have to go and learn to code because you should go and get a job as a coder. I think it just unlocks a world of possibilities in your head of what software does, how it's a lever to other things. I find this with every area that you look into in any detail, you realize that there's another way to look at the world, and techies look at the world a certain way. And when you can look at the world through the eyes of a techie, new possibilities open up. And it's really funny, even like talking to my wife about our kind of relationship and stuff like that. Even kind of weird software principles end up like coming into discussion. I don't know. I know there's a guy who kind of runs his family based on kind of like Scrum exercises. It's like, what's blocking you today, and what do you hope to achieve? And it's basically got this kind of agile, what they call agile kind of methodology, which is like a project management methodology around tech. Sort of applying it to the family setting. What's getting in your way, what are your blockers. So I think I'd encourage people to learn, not because they think that they're going to go off and become a software engineer, but because you're opening up your eyes to what's possible. And so I would just sort of play with languages. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what it's going to make you think about. And So just have a go at it, because it's not scary. It's really not, and you can get going straight away. A website I particularly like is Code Academy, because you can literally load up the browser and you just, Chrome or Safari or Firefox or whatever you use, and you can just go Code Academy on Google and then Ruby. Ruby is the language we code in. It's the beautiful language. It's the Italian one. It's expressive. It's got very few rules. Some people like languages that are very strict. You can only pass certain types of data around, and Ruby is a very expressive language. It underpins a lot of the kind of software as a service products that are out there. So a lot you will have used a lot of applications that are built on Ruby, I'm sure. I think Twitter was originally a Ruby coded language. But if you go on Code Academy, look for Ruby and just play around with it. Start to enjoy it. There's definitely things around kind of how systems talk to each other as well, the API side of things. I mean, you mentioned the sort of Royal College portfolio systems. I remember a very early tender that we did for the General Medical Council. We're doing one for CPD points, and they put out a tender for an app. And it was like, because the mobile phone apps were the new trendy thing, right? It was 2010. Everybody needed an app for everything. If we build a CPD app, then that's great. Then we can, we will have an app and everything will be rosy. And I looked at the tender documents and I thought, where's the API in this? Where's the application programming interface, which is basically a way to push data in and out of a system? And it wasn't there. And we pulled out of this tender. And sure enough, 8 years later, that project folded because it wasn't maintained. Now, if that thing had been done as an API, and if the code would have been written in open source code, any number of companies, including my own, could have come along and started pushing data into that API for the GMC. That we could, a doctor could come onto our system, do an appraisal, and then you could have pushed the CPD points into the GMC's app, into their application. But because there was no interface, that wasn't possible to do. Now, I'm not blaming the people who wrote that tender. It would have been very hard for somebody who was procuring that system to know what I know, because they don't have my background. But I think some sort of at least low-level understanding of what is possible and what software is about and how these systems communicate with each other would have at least sparked something in somebody's mind to go, do you know what? I think we should include this part within this tender, and we should be buying something that definitely has an API on it. And if I said there was a golden rule in health tech, make sure you're using systems that have an API on them, please. Make sure that there is some way to extract data out of that system, push data into that system, and to allow other computers to talk to it, because that's where everything falls down. That's where you go from your GP surgery to your secondary care, and maybe the data doesn't flow. It's because that thing can't talk to each other, because there is nothing to talk to. There is no interface. There is no way for those computer systems. Ambulatory care. What if you need an ambulance for someone? Make sure that ambulatory care system has got an interface to it so that your EPR can talk to it. And so there's a big push of everyone who kind of comes from a computer science background to be API, 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 API. It's like, give us these things. They're called the application programming interface. It's a way for systems to talk to each other. Even better if they are open source, because if they are open source, we can, as engineers, look inside them and see how they work, and then work out how we can work with them. So if someone's got an ambulance booking system and it's got the code there and they've got an interface, I, as another engineer, for a different, maybe I'm building a patient administration system, I, as an engineer, can then look and see how that code works and make sure we send data across. But, you don't need to build that whole system. As a physician associate, I'm not saying you should go and learn to code so that you can build that system. But I think just playing at it, enjoying it, discovering what that world's about will open your eyes to what, when you go to an engineer or when you buy someone's system, what is possible. on what you could do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. If there's a PA student, or even another NHS colleague listening and has heard this episode and is interested in what we've talked about, where should they go to find out more about some of the products that are on offer?
Well, you can go to our website, so SARD JV. There's online chat there, 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. So just ping that. We're a small enough company that person can say, I was on a podcast. I was listening to a podcast that had Kevin on it, and they were talking about workforce planning. Could you put me in touch with him? So just talk to the person on chat there. Ring me up. Follow me on Twitter, Kevin Monk.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. I'll leave links to the SARD website and your Twitter handle in the show notes of this episode so people can look on their device and find the links there. Thank you so much for joining me on the PA podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great fun.
And thanks to you for listening as well. I hope it's an interesting and slightly different topic of conversation for the podcast for you to listen to. If you've got any questions for me, you can find me on social media. We're at PA Podcast UK on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And I hope you'll join me again for the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Physician Associate Podcast.